Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today. I am Missy Clemens. I'm CCWT's Associate Director. And before I introduce today's incredible presenter, I wanted to remind you that we are continually recruiting presenters and adding them to our lineup. And if you wanted to find out more, our events calendar is on our homepage at www.cc.wisc.edu. And like I said, we're always updating that. And if you have an idea for a presenter or want to be a presenter, you can email us at ccwt@wisc.edu. And with that, I am so pleased to introduce our presenter today. Dr. Jodi Vandenberg-Daves is a distinguished scholar with a doctorate in history and a passionate advocate for social change. For many years, she taught, at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, focusing on systems of privilege, inequality, and social transformation. Her expertise spans women's history, gender, race, and leadership, with a particular emphasis on the history of motherhood. Jodi's a nationally recognized authority in the field, having authored Modern Motherhood and American History, among numerous articles and a book of poems. In addition to her academic achievements, Jodi has taken on significant leadership roles. She chaired the Department of Race, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at UW-La Crosse and served as executive director of the Greater La Crosse Area Diversity Council, where she led efforts to foster inclusive workplaces and communities. Her work as a director of federal grants from 2001 to 2009 helped to improve history education, and she's currently a faculty fellow, assisting others in grant writing and development. In 2019, Jodi launched the Mentoring Circles program, connecting students to community leaders. Jodi's a sought-after speaker on women's leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion. She also serves as a developmental editor, helping nonfiction authors refine their work. Her leadership, research, and commitment to social progress make her a valuable resource in the ongoing conversation about intersectionality and social justice. And with that, I'll turn it over to her. Jodi.
Thank you so much, Missy. What a nice introduction, and it's great to be here today. I always like to be part of this experience. I'm kind of new to the CCWT, but I'm an enthusiastic participant and research affiliate. So welcome. I don't see your faces; I just see numbers, but I'm assuming you're out there, and I'm going to share my screen now. Well, there we go. Okay. So yeah, we're going to talk about confronting perfectionism and imposter syndrome. And it's something that just plagues a lot of us and seems to be kind of perennial interest. Based on the background that you just heard, you can imagine that I'm going to be approaching this somewhat around how this is socially constructed and not just an us issue. It's a larger issue. Just a little bit about me. As mentioned, I'm just kind of a longtime academic. I have some leadership background, and now I do career coaching, consulting, and different classes and keynote speaking and things like that. And I am an author and an editor, and I love to write. And so everything that I do is sort of informed by that. I'm the mother of 3 beautiful young adults out in the world. I am a multi-project thriver. I like to have multiple projects. I'm just sharing that a little bit because maybe that's you too, around and how do you deal with perfectionism in those situations. I think of myself as a recovering or partial perfectionist because, like most of us, I think we're not perfectionists in all areas, and we also can mitigate perfectionism. So that's part of what I'll be talking about. I have a first-generation college background, and that shapes a little bit how I've approached higher education and maybe some internalized perfectionism around navigating systems that were new to me when I was young. They're kind of old to me now, but they were new to me then. I'm a lifelong teacher and learner, and I always believe in the goodness of my fellow humans and the possibilities of coming together and sharing ideas like this. So again, thank you for being here. And a little bit about you. I'd be interested in just kind of seeing a little bit of what's going on in this group. If you would be willing to type in the chat a theme of the last 6 months of your work and an area of growth that you might have. And Missy and Claudia, perhaps you could read a little, or one of you could read something from the chat for me, because I can't see the chat while presenting.
Absolutely. So if y'all want to just put in the chat that one word theme of the last 6 months in your work.
Oh, maybe I can see the chat. Let's see.
Yep, I can read it for you.
Ah, I can read it.
Oh, go ahead.
I can see it now. Yeah, comprehensive, interesting, career counseling, chaos. I'm sorry. Uncertainty, transition, change, stressful, new beginnings, intentional development, acclimating. A lot of very dynamic words. Some really on the difficult end of the spectrum and some a little bit more exciting, but very dynamic. Great. And the transition and uncertainty, very good. To share that, I'm sorry, some of that is so challenging. Change, leaning in. Okay. Can you now type in an area of growth at work for you? What is, just skill development or mindset or project, delegating boundaries, good, online teaching, self-trust, leadership. Great. Those are some, okay, pacing, boundaries, self-care, managing strategic projects, self-efficacy. Hi, Ashley. I know Ashley. Balance. Yeah, great. Joy. Thank you, Mary. Self-compassion. It's good to set those intentions and think. I always like to think a little bit past, a little bit future. So thank you for bringing some of that into the room. You're not seeing one another here, but you're hopefully hearing a little bit or getting a sense of who else is in the room, what's going on with them. So let's reflect throughout our time together, our very short time together. How have perfectionism and imposter syndrome shown up in your life? I imagine you already reflected on that a little bit and just decided to sign up for this, but think about different arenas, different chapters of your life, and I'll kind of get into a little bit of the nuance of maybe moments and situations that can trigger that for us. In what ways have these challenges kept you from being your most creative and confident self, and perhaps the contributor or leader that you want to be? How has this held you back in some ways? Just kind of pause for a second and think about that. How has it shown up? In what ways has it held you back? And then keep those in your mind. And then what can you and other people do about it? Because I always think that all these things that we can work on here, we can work on better in community and with others. So with our time together, I'm going to give you some context and background on perfectionism and imposter syndrome, some basic stuff. We're going to develop a little more self-awareness, at least for this little time. If you want to internalize that, we might want to go deeper and work together some more. But for now, this is good. We're going to develop some workplace awareness because our perfectionism and imposter syndrome do not exist in vacuums. We're going to look at some strategies, and then I'll show you some other opportunities to follow up. So I always do a little bit of community agreement stuff as we get into this space. We'll have a little bit of time to share, even if it's just on chat. So as we do, please think about building some community. Hopefully we'll have some actual discussion too, live discussion, but please remember the sensitivity of work situations in general. And perhaps a heightened moment right now around the sensitivity of work situations. So keep confidentiality for anything that gets shared here and be humble in learning from others. So those are my basic guidelines whenever I bring people together who are, working together. I'm also just noticing that I was introduced, but I meant to introduce myself with my last name up there. And also I have she, her pronouns. So I don't know why it's not on my Zoom, but that's on me. A caveat to this webinar is intended to be just provide information and conversation. I'm not a psychologist, that's not my background. It is hopefully conducive to your mental health to think about it, but everything here is just general stuff, not mental health advice. And so if you need mental health support, if this brings things up for you, please avail yourself of that. That's super important. We all need that. And so thanks for joining this little webinar and participating in the spirit in which it's intended. So Let's talk about perfectionism and imposter syndrome a little bit from the research literature. They tend to overlap and they tend to be studied together. When people have a lot of doubts about their actions, they get really concerned about their mistakes, their potential mistakes. They're really worried about what others can think about them. These are perfectionistic traits. And having those traits active in you can predict imposter syndrome. You can then sometimes feel like it's just sort of common sense that if you feel like you're going to make mistakes, you feel like maybe you're not capable of really doing this, or people think you're not capable. So imposter syndrome comes up. So let's just get a little more definitional here then. Perfectionism, according to the psychology research, a personality trait. I don't love personality trait because it conflicts a little bit with the idea of a growth mindset, which we'll talk about. But one definition is a personality trait that strives for high standards of performance and is accompanied by a tendency to critically evaluate oneself. It's closely related to a person's mental health and can have a profound impact on a person's work, study, and their life. And the psychology literature does differentiate a little bit between perfectionistic striving, just seeking excellence, and perfectionistic concerns, more worried about avoiding failure. So there's kind of a continuum there. Are you just striving for excellence, or are you preoccupied with failing? They can really intersect with one another, though. So I'm just going to give you a second to take that in. Also, feel free to ask questions, type questions in the chat. If you all can help me monitor the chat a little bit, Claudia or Missy, that's great. So imposter syndrome, a condition that describes high-achieving individuals who, despite their objective successes, fail to internalize their accomplishments and have persistent self-doubt and fear of being exposed as a fraud or an imposter. And again, you can see how these very much just interlink. And so people who experience imposter syndrome may experience increased levels of stress, burnout, and decreased job performance and satisfaction over time. If we don't get a hold of some of these difficult feelings, they can really impact us over time and take the joy and the fun out of work and reduce our creativity. So some of the negative, so sorry, the way that's coming in, some positive impacts that people have talked about. People who are perfectionistic tend to have a lot of internal motivation. They tend to be highly engaged in work, doing a lot, trying to get it all done. They tend to be goal setters and achievement oriented. And those things are strengths that obviously can be used to our advantage. People with perfectionistic tendencies also tend to be conscientious. And those, again, can be really strong things. However, when perfectionistic tendencies skew a little bit too far in one direction, it can lead to procrastination. I'm afraid I'll make a mistake. I'm afraid I'll never be able to handle that great big thing, so I'm just going to procrastinate on it. It can lead to indecisiveness, very much linked to procrastination, and negative mental health consequences. Trying so hard to prove ourselves, as I mentioned in the sort of teaser for this, auditioning for every role, that takes so much energy that could be better spent in more creative, fluid, pro-social ways. And instead, we can sometimes wind up with anxiety, depression, and burnout from trying to do this over years. And workaholism is also a risk, really, of not sort of getting a hold of those perfectionistic tendencies. And then also related to that, just avoiding risks. If you're afraid that you'll make mistakes, you're likely to avoid risks. And that can, again, just stifle you with the gifts that you have to give to the world and the creativity that you have to develop. So research shows that in the aggregate, perfectionism does not actually result in better workplace performance overall, because people tend to fixate on details rather than seeing the big picture or seeing opportunities to collaborate. You can be kind of spinning around details, and that doesn't necessarily help performance overall. It's like shining the gem, but we really need to move on to the next gem. It's very common. Perfectionism and imposter syndrome, both very common. It does depend on who's being studied. There's a lot of research on students because any of you who are in higher ed know students are captive audiences for lots of psychology research. But what we do seem to be finding is that younger generations are reporting more perfectionism, and especially maladaptive perfectionism, like those things that you just don't take risks. You're constantly on yourself. And so another 30% have at least some form of perfectionism, according to the recent research. Psychology Today notes about 70% of adults may experience imposterism or imposter syndrome at least once in their lifetime. So that's a lot of us, right? We're not alone if we have these feelings. Evidence suggests that women experience both issues more and that women report more workplace stress than men. And in some of my other presentations and stuff, I go into the evidence on much higher levels of burnout for women across the board. So, and some of that burnout can be linked to trying so hard and often knowing we have to try a little harder. So I want us to think though about other things beyond just the psychology. So we are in a particular historical moment. I'm a historian by training, as was mentioned. So I think about the moment we're in. I'm trying to think about it. It's really unwieldy, as you all know. History's changing fast. But I think we can see that perfectionism is abounding in the culture, that social media has helped create that sense of perfectionism. Economic insecurity can make people who feel uh, that they don't have family wealth to fall back on, that they are already not very well paid, that they have children to support, whatever, that can kick in our perfectionism, because this is a time when a lot of people are feeling that economic insecurity. Because of everything that's coming at us, and I don't even need to say a lot about that, you just read the news, right? A lot of us have emotional battle fatigue around just kind of the culture and world we're living in and how that might be impacting our workplaces. So sometimes that can trigger that I better just work harder, faster, better, with more detail. And then we have more awareness of mental health issues, which is in a lot of ways a good part of our historical moment. The bad part is that part of why we have awareness is that we have such high levels, and such high levels, especially among young people, and that's a global phenomenon. But those are just a few things to keep in mind about our bigger picture in which perfectionism could be showing up. So what else do we know? There are some broad patterns around perfectionism. Men are more likely to, if they have perfectionistic tendencies, underperform and avoid challenging goals and avoid feedback, which is kind of interesting. Women are more likely to just keep challenging themselves more, but they never feel relieved of the stress and anxiety, even when they're performing as expected. So it's interesting, you kind of see underperforming versus overperforming. And again, those are just aggregate things. Individuals will vary. Perfectionism can fluctuate for people, and people can learn constructive strategies. So that's part of why we're here, right? But I want to just take a few minutes too to talk about the social construction of these behaviors and mindsets. And one thinker who's been very influential for me is Dr. Jenny Vasquez Newsom, whose recent book Untapped Leadership offers a lot of insight around particularly imposter syndrome. She says that as a Black woman, quote, during fundamental moments of identity development, I became very aware of how little I belonged, and that sensibility permeated how I moved through the world. I cannot ignore the factors in my environment that subtly told me I was an imposter. And that to me is very much crystallizes the way the social construction of imposter syndrome. Highly recommend the book, by the way. So some other pieces of that. Women often, in general, and women of color even more so, often have to work harder and overcome more hurdles. We have a cultural distrust of women in power. We have leadership icons that skew male. We know from lots of research that men's achievements are more likely to be attributed to their individual capability, while for women are more likely to be attributed to perceived luck and preferential treatment. Men are more likely to be promoted on potential. Women often have to show performance. Those are very well-researched phenomena. Most of us don't read the research literature, but if we grow up as women, we often just internalize this awareness, and that can really lead to risk aversion. So women are often required to be competent and nice. So there's more than one thing to be perfectionistic about, not just performing well, but also performing niceness. Behavior rewarded in men, like assertiveness and entrepreneurship, tends to be less rewarded in women. So there's also that, like, how am I supposed to behave? And we know from a lot of research that women's mistakes as leaders tend to cost them more, which can lead to less risk-taking and a pattern of perfectionism that can slow progress. Because knowing, internalizing the idea that you might be judged more harshly for mistakes can lead to perfectionism. Similar things can happen for people of color and other marginalized groups. And for women of color in particular, I want to talk about that and other forms of intersectional bias just for a minute, because racialized sexism can correlate with being more on guard at work. When you're on guard, you might be watching your P's and Q's, dotting your I's and crossing your T's even more so, right? So that if you have any underlying perfectionistic tendencies, that can contribute. Research shows that women of color are more likely to face challenges to their credibility, which can, again, make you feel like overperforming is necessary. LGBT workers often feel they need to be closeted at work, which can lead to hypervigilance and can contribute to perfectionism. They often don't reveal information on their resumes to avoid bias or discrimination, and that's especially true for young people. And then if some of their leadership might not even be known about, and they might even have more to prove. So these social construction of inequality really can lead to self-sabotaging behaviors, and our mindsets, perfectionism and imposter syndrome, can be reactions to systems, internalized sexism and other isms that can contribute. And this can be linked to missed opportunities to advance. Sometimes we're engaging in perfectionism or overperforming to be people pleasers, to go that extra mile, to prove our worthiness, to prove that we belong. When we don't feel like we belong, or we're afraid we might not belong, if we don't have an environment of trust, it can put us on guard and promote perfectionism and caution and overwork and burnout. So I guess I like to just think about this just reflect for a minute on your own reactions to social contexts in which you weren't sure whether you belonged. What do you do when you feel like an outsider in a situation? You could think maybe you observe, maybe you try to learn rules that might be unspoken but are there. Maybe but probably you perform a little extra because you're not sure what the rules are. You got to try out lots of different things, and you might be seen as an outsider. If you feel like you might be unfairly judged, ratchet that up a little bit more. If the rules and norms are hard to decode, ratchet that up a little bit more. So workplace cultures can really promote the potential for perfectionism and imposter syndrome. So in the next couple slides, I'm just going to talk about a couple background sets of sort of triggers and issues, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion here in the middle. Gosh, this is going so fast, as I knew it would. So workplace cultures can promote perfectionism, and partly because of systems of privilege and inequality, which I was talking about there, and we go on and on about that. But let's also think about some of these other things, cultures of urgency at our workplace that can make us just kind of feel like we're spinning, daily time pressure, criticism or lack of support, just people just not reassuring us and helping us see our best or supporting us. Environments of low trust can really trigger feelings of perfectionism or imposter syndrome. Rigid workplaces that don't allow for a diversity of approaches to problems and voices and processes can contribute as well. Impersonal environments where people just don't feel like they're seen as full human beings can contribute. Lack of transparency and processing decisions. When people feel in the dark about what's going on, again, insecurities creep in, hypervigilance. And the lack of diversity and value placed on diversity can, of course, be part of the trigger for all of this. It seems like a rigid place, and especially if you're an outsider, feel like an outsider, in any way, or perceived that way, that can really be challenging. So I want you to I've got, again, one more slide, and then we'll get into have you reflect. But as you look at this, just for yourself for now, are some of these things present in your workplace? Or on the flip side, are there some really positive things that are sort of on the other end of the continuum in your workplace that give you some breathing room, and who's promoting that? Those are also good things to look at. So then let's look at the situational triggers, and a few of you, when you talked about the themes in your workplace, talked a lot about transition and change and stress. So situational triggers can also be influential in setting off imposter syndrome feelings and perfectionistic behaviors and strivings. Situations of rapid change. This is going on throughout industries in our world, right? We're in a time of rapid change, that historical moment thing again. Periods of acute work-life balance struggle, returning to work after having a baby, having an elder care crisis, having a personal health challenge, all those kinds of things. Conflict, that's a situational trigger. Tight deadlines or high stakes assignments. Taking on, even if it's a good thing, you're taking on a new role, you're adapting to a new role, that's a moment of transition, and that can trigger some perfectionistic and imposter syndrome feelings. Proving yourself, feeling like you need to prove yourself as a young person. And, for those that I know, this is the Center for Research on College Workforce Transitions. And so as young people are transitioning, or recent college grads of any age are transitioning into that workforce, those can be hard moments for dealing with with perfectionism and imposter syndrome. If you're positioning yourself for advancement, you're really just trying to hit the accelerator button or pedal on your career, that can be exciting, but it can also bring up those feelings. When you're a new leader to a team, that can happen. If you're being bullied or harassed or marginalized, sadly, and then, that can really also bring it up. How do I act in this situation? And in the background, I haven't said the word in my slideshow, but hypervigilance is really kind of in there in the background. Even the research shows when your success is being recognized, like with a big award or some other recognition, sometimes that can trigger imposter syndrome experiences. So, look at that list for a second and just, again, take a mental note. Are you experiencing any of these things right now? Have you, or can you look back and maybe you've experienced them in the past and you've noticed, yes, that brings out some issues in me. So we're going to take just a few minutes. I am mindful of time I was hoping open it up, Missy, if that's okay, to having people actually speak out loud here. Is that possible?
Absolutely. Let me just,
Oh, and thank you for the chat.
yeah, yep, we have the chat. I just noticed that someone put in the Q&A about, just so everybody knows, somebody had mentioned that they have another meeting and had to leave. This is being recorded, and so this will be on our website. I am going to go in here. I have to figure out how to, or not figure out, but I have to go in here and make sure everybody can talk. So I am going in right now. You're muted, but I'm allowing you to talk. So if you have something you would like to say, we're going to have an open discussion. And if you don't have the option yet, I'm getting to you. So fear not.
And I do know this is being recorded, so I know people might be, feeling a little bit more cautious, and you don't have to talk about your workplace right now. You can just reflect on, aspects of workplace culture that you've noticed that might bring this out, or situational triggers that you've noticed might bring this out. The third question is, who can support you and how in unlearning some perfectionism? And I'll talk about that as kind of a team sport, towards the end here of the presentation. But I would love to hear from a few of you. It makes it feel a lot less lonely over here in presenter land. So if you do have any thoughts or perspectives to share, this is your time.
Hi, this is Mary. Jodi, thank you for presenting on this. To answer your first question, I think one of the things that I see in workplace culture is that working in higher ed and then working in the multicultural affairs area, there's this constant need to feel like I have to, like you said, like perform at 200% because I don't know who is validating these programs for these students to be able to be successful. So it's constantly feeling like I'm on this really fast spinning hamster wheel that never ends, and it's like this work is never validated. And even if it is validated, it's like, oh, all that work was validated for this, like the wrong outcome, right? Or maybe not quite where you wanted it to go. So I think segregation and that racism and sexism that shows up, whether or not we want to talk about it, that contributes to my workplace and my experiences.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Mary. And I think you're pointing to some of the institutional devaluing of certain kinds of work. And I felt that deeply in my last year, in higher ed as well. In my light is flickering here. Chairing a race, gender, and sexuality studies department, and so on top of our personal experiences that people are often having in that work around racism or sexism and other isms, there's that feeling of the work being it's hard to get that work valued or validated, as you said. And so, yeah, that can definitely be a trigger, and it can make it difficult to make decisions in the moment because it creates a sense of urgency. Thank you. Other comments?
Hello, can you hear
Hi.
me?
Yeah. Hi, Jenna.
Okay. Hi, thank you for opening up the discussion. I know there was a kind of a sidebar conversation going on in the chat. So um, I just put a little bit of information regarding the topic of workplace bullying and just, kind of thinking about in the past, even having like coworkers or supervisors where, like you said in those previous slides, that where it's kind of a fault finding environment. There's a lot of criticism, not a lot of support. I think that can definitely be a situational trigger. And it does kind of, it's tough to internalize that after a certain period of time. You kind of have to work through it with people who are supportive and who do recognize your strengths and efforts. But I know that that's something a lot of people have gone through at some point in their career. And a good resource for that is it's a book called The Bully at Work. And it actually has quite a few actionable items and how to deal with those situations. I mean, if you have supportive management, if you have HR that can help, it's a tough situation, and it's actually a topic that isn't broached that often, but I think we're doing more to discuss that topic.
Thank you so much for that. And that actually could be another wonderful presentation topic, potentially for this group. Yeah, and I think you bring up too that people, even if you're not being bullied and harassed now at work, you might carry the scars, that it can take a long time to heal from those things, and that you need time and space and support for that healing. And so that is a little bit adjacent to perfectionism and imposter syndrome, but it's something that can trigger it. It can just be part of the complex response that people have to being bullied or harassed. So thank you so much. And I'm taking note of that book.
Thank you.
Other comments or examples? Maybe anyone has a story of feeling like they learned how to access good support for unlearning perfectionism, teaming up with coworkers or, whatever, getting some good coaching or therapy or, employee resource groups. I don't know. Are there ways that people have found support?
So, Jodi, it's Missy. So one thing that I've done, something new for CCWT this year, is we've hired interns.
Mhm.
And I've tried to create a culture that really sets the stage for making mistakes and asking questions, and really, really honors learning through mistakes, because I really worry about perfectionism, and I try to drive it home that we learn better almost through mistakes than we do from trying to be perfect. And if we're trying to be perfect and we're not willing to make mistakes, then we're not taking risks. And especially when you're in research, like CCWT is, you have to be willing to take some risks. And so I think that's one of the things that I am a recovering perfectionist, and I'm struggling with it. So, that's something that's really important to me when it comes to especially working with students, is allowing them the space to, you're going to mess up, and that's okay. And when I see them kind of relax, when I say that, it brightens my day, and it not just my day, it means the world to me. And so I think when you hold that space for other people, it can change you. And so,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I just,
thank you.
yeah,
Go ahead.
no, that's okay. That's just something that I've noticed.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. It really is helping create cultures that mitigate perfectionism and imposter syndrome, and especially helping grow young emerging professionals into an awareness of it's okay to make mistakes. That's just really beautiful work, and I appreciate that. And it's a kind of leadership that any of us can take on, and I appreciate that you've taken that on so intentionally, because it's you know I like to think about being the person you needed when you were younger, and we can all think about that. So great. Thank you for all that. Um, so so let's go a little bit into the growth mindset piece of this. I always like to really be honest about the hard things because I feel like we sometimes we jump too quickly to solutions without recognizing that our psychology and our behavioral things we do they're not existing in a vacuum. So hopefully I've given you a little sketch there, and a lot of you have a whole bunch of background on this yourselves, of course. But so let's get into the growth mindset. Perfectionistic tendencies can be mitigated and channeled in healthy ways. You can train yourself to be more flexible with what your idea of success is, for yourself, for a project, for your unit, even your idea of perfect accuracy. Maybe things are not perfectly accurate. You can train yourself, or you can get someone to help you proofread. There are just ways that you can try to take some of it off of your shoulders. You can work with your high motivation and conscientiousness. If you consider yourself kind of perfectionistic, which I assume many of you do because you're here, you can work with that and you can use it for good. You can also, as Missy was describing, be part of helping others with perfectionism and imposter syndrome, and then you can create more humane workplaces and more innovative because, like Missy said, people relax. And guess what? When you're relaxed, that's when you're more receptive to creativity, and even inspiring workplaces. So let's think about that. And even, in the spirit of not being rigid, even be thinking about not over-identifying as a perfectionist, as a personality trait. In certain triggering situations, your perfectionistic tendencies might come out. But again, happens to the best of us, happens to most of us, right? It's not a fixed trait, and you can have a growth mindset about it. So for one thing, you can kind of do an asset map. You can think about the areas where you're not so perfectionistic. And why is that? Do the stakes feel lower? Have you had more practice? Does it feel more like a natural kind of outgrowth of who you are in these areas? Do you have more social support in those areas? What are the areas where you're less perfectionistic, and how can you learn from that? And then recognize the areas where you've grown, where maybe, you're 5 years into a leadership role, and you think about yourself in that first 6 months, and maybe how, anxious or frantic you might have been, how little you knew about the role and yourself. Think about how you've grown and how you've developed perhaps more ease in certain situations. And wherever you see that ease, you could potentially grow it. And of course, practicing self-compassion, I saw a term that was typed into our chat. Also normalizing perfectionism and imposter syndrome. Like I said, it's pretty common. I'm moving this over. I don't know how it's going to show up in the video, but just so you can see I used to have this near my desk. I need to find my bumper sticker. But it is normal. You can befriend your perfectionism, as this little slogan suggests, and snuggle with your demons. And I think of things like confidence as very similar to balance. It waxes and wanes. I think there's actually research showing that women have a confidence gap with men, but that by the time we're in our 40s and 50s, it's often erased, and women can be more confident than men. Confidence can grow, and confidence can be present in some domains and less so in others. And again, you can map that out. Confidence often grows over time, but new situations and rapid change can challenge our confidence. So again, that awareness of your situation right now is helpful. And it also really helps to just soften your self-judgment about mistakes. That is really a practice. That's not something, I could put it in a bullet point, but you really have to practice it. Accept that work is messy. Work is especially messy right now. No one knows how to do a lot of things at this moment. No one knows how to respond to a lot of rapid changes that have come at us. People are figuring it out. It's messy. Life is messy, and people are messy. And underneath perfectionism is sometimes an illusion that we can control a lot of things that we can't. So also seek help when you need it. That's one of the best ways to help yourself with these issues. So I also like to deepen our self-awareness a little bit more too. There are cycles and moments in our work. Think about where you are. Think about which of these words or phrases resonate with you right now. Are you in a generative stage? Are you generating a lot of new ideas and new projects? Or are you in more of a, coasting stage? Are you excited to bring high standards and you love the challenge and the problems you're trying to solve? Or are you bringing those high standards to things that you don't even want to be very involved in, and you're just doing it on autopilot? Are you recovering from having just had a big push at work? Are you tired? Are you overwhelmed? Or are you adapting to change really rapidly? Are you preoccupied by other life situations? All of those can affect perfectionism and imposter syndrome. Are you doing something for the first time? Just give yourself grace. There's first times. Brené Brown has a nice phrasing about that. Take some perspective too. You're part of something bigger. You're not responsible for everything. I remember when all the work I always put in a lot of work grading students' papers over the years, but I remember having a moment thinking, I'm the only one at this university teaching these kids how to write. Like, I don't have to do everything. I don't have to be correcting their grammar. I can focus on, their historical ideas or whatever it might be. You don't have to do everything. It's not all on you. And then mind your ego. That's related. Step back from thinking so much depends on you and that you can control so much. You can do your part, but very large forces are at work, right? Somebody I interviewed for the book I'm finishing up on bringing your values to work over the course of a career. I'll call her Olivia. She was doing public health in the pandemic, really high intensity labor, right? And part of how she coped with that situation, she said, I just remembered we're just one piece of the puzzle. I have to keep reminding myself of that. I'm not doing everything. I'm doing my part. Also remembering your why. You don't come to work to be perfect and show everyone how perfect you are. You come to work to contribute something meaningful. If you think hard about what your values are, how you use your voice, then your confidence can go with that and grow from that. If you surround yourself as much as you can with people who remind you of your values and the values you bring and your purpose, it's also going to cushion you from some of this perfectionism challenges. So there is that idea, I don't know who said it, but what you pay attention to grows. So if you think about awareness of your core strengths, maybe you even put them on a list where you can see them at your office, you start paying attention to those and letting some of the other stuff go, that can bring some ease to your work. What kinds of work situations and challenges and opportunities on top of the values, what kinds and strengths, what kinds of things at work bring out your creativity and joy? How can you do more of those things rather than trying to do everything? I encourage you to reflect on that, make your list, revise that list, grow that list, keep that list in mind. Those two lists, I guess, your strengths and what brings you joy. And then involve others in helping you with accountability around that. Keep your eye on those strengths. Bonus points, call out other people's strengths, especially other women and other people who are marginalized. I originally did this for women, and I should have changed that little PowerPoint. It's for everyone, but it is helpful to elevate the professionalism of people who can feel marginalized in the workplace, especially. So know this about the leadership roles you're taking on, the times you're trying to use your voice in challenging situations. This is something I often told myself in leadership roles. This was some of my self-talk that I worked on. Sometimes you get the love and appreciation, gratitude that goes with all that hard work you're doing. Sometimes you just don't. And it's not a thing to necessarily take personally. It just is the way it is. There isn't always a correlation between your hard work and other people's validation and appreciation. So keeping in mind your own kind of internal motivation is important. Try not to take things personally. Develop your own self-love and appreciation of the work you do. And if you take away one little tip, this helps me. I have a ta-da list that goes Of course, we all have our to-do lists, but a friend of mine told me I keep a to-do list, and that is where I remind myself of things I've done. And I've kind of added at work, but I've also kind of added because it's just so easy. As long as I'm going into my to-do list, I have a category called Beautiful Life, and I just put in, oh, and here's something else I did and enjoyed, and it becomes a little mini journal, and it becomes a space to kind of love on myself. So it's an idea, an actionable idea. Keeping that perspective. At the end of the day, work is work. Live your life in ways that give you breaks, and not just breaks from the work, but breaks from the frame of reference of work. Because we become, I think, the most ruminative when we spend countless hours at work, when we don't get breaks from work, when we don't get nourished by people, situations, nature, whatever it is, that just disrupt that primary frame of reference being your work identity. Nurture enjoyment of your life and take care of yourself. So some specific strategies around self-talk, for example. When you have large projects and big ongoing challenges, ask yourself, can you envision a positive outcome for this down the road, at least for a portion of it, and move towards that. Move towards that bigger thing out there. Letting go of some of the details needing to be perfect. Remind yourself, if you have perfectionist tendencies, and I have some young people in my life, including my 3 children and a niece that I do a lot of mentoring of, such rock stars, all of them. And I'm constantly saying to them, if you give even a portion of yourself, it's going to be enough because you're bringing so much. And anyone who shows up for a webinar like this, it's probably the same thing. You're bringing value, you're bringing expertise, professionalism, integrity, work ethic, passion. You're bringing those things. And so it doesn't have to all be perfect because you're already bringing a lot of things that may be invisible to you, but are probably visible to others. You're probably just about always doing enough. So think about doing less. Another thing I've sometimes done literally is just take something, just look at my to-do list and go, got to take something off. Just completely let it go. Missed opportunity. I think I'll say more about that in a minute. But stop auditioning for every role. You don't have to audition all the time. You've already proven a lot. And think about that. Think about your own story. I always feel like the power for our transformation is partly from reflecting on our stories. What have you already proven to yourself, if nothing else? So also, some more hacks here. Normalize perfectionism for other people too. Be open about it. Initiate conversations, including with your team, especially if you're a leader. You can say that you're working on your own perfectionism. It gives other people space to go, oh, me too. You can practice admitting mistakes and moving on. Again, that's just like normalizing it. Ooh, fell off my radar. Thanks for reminding me. Don't have to have this profuse apology. You can just show people how to let it roll off of you and move on. And then you're modeling for others. You can practice boundary setting and boundary holding. I know boundaries came up in some of those chat terms. It's a practice. It's not a perfect, it's a practice. And give yourself credit when you do it. And then you're also hopefully doing some normalizing of that for others. You can learn to amplify your communication around your boundaries. If you have a supportive relationship with your supervisor, that can be a good place to start and to work, but you can do it in other arenas as well. You can find other people to serve as your perfectionism mitigation support team. I think it probably should be a shorter phrase there. A little bit about balance. Try to take on less work, if at all possible. And maybe that's really not possible for you. And I respect that. There might be just like, maybe there's some job insecurity. Maybe there's something that just got dumped. Is there anywhere that you can pull back for your own sanity though? I mentioned this before, embraced missed opportunities. When I was, and I'll just elaborate a tiny bit. When I was a department chair, that's when I really started thinking about this. I started thinking, every week there's like somebody in my inbox going, this could happen. We could collaborate on this. There's this new opportunity for your students. And I finally had to say to myself, I'm actually going to put on my to-do list a missed opportunity every week so that because I know that I can't do them all. And I'm such a goal-oriented to-do person. If I make it a goal to miss an opportunity, then that's what I've done. And maybe someone else will do that. Maybe someone else. Try to make things easier, not harder. I know that sounds simple, but I don't know, we can make things harder for ourselves. So focusing on our key contributions rather than volunteering for everything is one way that we can make things easier rather than harder. And remember, sometimes the urge to volunteer for everything comes from a place of insecurity that can be socially constructed by some of our identities. So it's complicated, right? Collaborate on the division of labor at work and delegate if you can do so. Sometimes this helps other people. You're moving the energy where it needs to go. Sometimes people really want to try something new and it's part of their development. For larger projects and ongoing challenges, cultivate patience. Do small things. Remember that learning space is good too. You don't always have to be producing. And then nurture social connections at home, at work. Have your people who help you set your boundaries and fortify your perspective on what you bring to the table. And then team up. Who are the trusted people who can help you practice for maybe a difficult conversation that you're feeling perfectionistic about, or a presentation, or something that you just want someone to look over, give you a little reassurance. Start small, just one buddy. Try co-working with people. I have a friend I do that with, and we tend to like bring the tasks that we're stressed out about. And we're like, well, this is the time we're going to brainstorm with each other. We're going to hold each other's hands figuratively and get this done. Share that to-do list accomplishments with someone who will listen to you. Let other people know you're doing this kind of thing. Foster collaboration. And then be an amplifier for other women and underrepresented people. The women in President Obama's cabinet kind of made that famous. They had a pact that because their voices often didn't get heard as women, they would amplify the other women in the room, kind of like she said, and make sure those ideas got credit. So just to return a little bit to the workplace, and again, the work of Dr. Vasquez-Newsom, building resilient systems is important. She says, we're powering through during moments when we should power down. In the name of resilience, we're not spending enough time grieving and connecting meaningfully with others. And she's writing the pandemic moment too, because we've always been told those emotions need to be shed for us to lead. We're not allowing ourselves to fully acknowledge the way in which the world is not okay. So there's a lot of emotions that I like the way she acknowledges. And then in the light of that, rather than focus on building resilient leaders, we should build resilient systems that are reliable and stable because they're built on trust, authenticity, and connection. And yes, the ability to make mistakes. And diversity at all levels is key, and that allows for some unleashing of the confidence. So I know I'm running out of time here, so I might be a little bit rushy, but you can play it back at a slower speed. So for example, some ideas from Dr. Vasquez-Newsom: team meetings in which people can share their concerns around things like perfectionism and imposter syndrome, explicitly dismantling the concept that everyone should know everything about their jobs. Just love that. It's so basic, and yet I don't think we say it enough. Creating team-generated norms about what success can look like, about what flexibility for mistakes can look like. Intentionality, she says, around onboarding, feedback, and evaluation processes for team members. So there's a cushion for mistakes. The mistakes are not, they're part of the situation. When people are dealing with a steep learning curve, and I mentioned some of those situational triggers, she says, balance it with a steep support curve. Know who on your team is dealing with a steep learning curve. And then intentionality. Predict imposter syndrome trigger points and build in buffers to support others, like support maps to figure out who supports whom. I just love the idea of resilient systems, and I encourage you to follow Dr. Vasquez-Newsom on LinkedIn. Her Untapped Leaders group is really great. So hopefully you can be advocates for workplace support for these kind of more humane, inclusive, diverse workplaces for people who struggle with imposter syndrome and perfectionism. You can help promote flexible, transparent supervisor practices and processes. Again, when people don't know the rules, that can be really hard. You can have real talk about perfectionism and mental health in general. You can have real talk about the systems that diminish the confidence of so many of us. And you can practice amplifying other people's ideas. So coming back to you, we've talked about cultivating self-awareness, noticing patterns in your behavior and mindset, self-compassion, teaming up, working with friends to solve problems. You can also do some job and career goal auditing and planning, thinking about whether you're doing more in your role than you really need to. because of perfectionism. And that's something coaching can help with, but you can consider then you can work with me or you can work with some other coach on some of the above to really start internalizing it more. Therapy can be a good thing. Help-seeking behavior of any kind can really foster growth. So learn some self-advocacy and negotiation skills to help you manage your workload and your goals, and that will also help. I think, we are coming near the end of our time, but can you think of one idea that spoke to you? Or one thing, I'll just skip the second question real quick here. One thing you can take off your plate. I'm going to just give you a second with that while I try to check out that chat again. Whoops. Somehow I can't see the chat again. When I click, I just get my slide advanced. Okay, I still don't see the chat, but can anyone share out loud, unmute, or Missy, can you read something from the chat for me?
So I don't see any updates to the chat.
Okay. I'll let you think about it. I know we're coming to the end of the hour, but think about one. I mean, if you're going to spend an hour of your time at a webinar, hopefully you can have a takeaway, just like for yourself before you move on to the next thing. And if there's one thing you can take off your plate, that can be a really great takeaway if something's already coming to you. If not, put it on your to-do list to look at your to-do list. Okay, so if you want to dig deeper with us, I do have a new career accelerator package that I was actually going to call Perfectionism and Imposter Syndrome career package, small, short term, but I thought that might be a little hard to ask your employer to fund. So I'm going to call it Career Accelerator Coaching Package, and I can include that if that's something that you want, because I already have some ideas around all that. But this is what it includes. It's just 3 short, intro call for free and a few 3 coaching sessions, some worksheets and weekly email to support you. And there's a discount through March 15th. So if you are interested, you can point your cameras right there. And I have a flyer for upcoming events I'll share with you as well. As I mentioned, this can be adapted. And sometimes any kind of a career accelerator coaching can be employer funded. Other places to find me, I have a class called Unlocking Your Leadership Potential that's goes much more deep. I'm also doing, I don't know how many of you identify this way, but this is just like brand new, and I just have an interest survey, not even a place on my website yet. But I'm thinking about supporting vision keepers who are trying to work on DEI initiatives in this difficult historical moment, just as a drop-in team leader support group, people who are leading teams, which I think is a particularly challenging point. I have a couple presentations coming up I've got one on perfectionism, but you're already getting that, and another on self-care for the Greater La Crosse Area Diversity Council. And I'm going to be working on some coaching packages and courses around supporting mothers and caregivers, which is a long-term passion of mine. So check out my website, sign up for my email, and if nothing else, I'd love to at least connect with you on LinkedIn and learn a little bit more about the folks who signed up for this group and enhance my connections with all things CCWT, which is such a great organization. So I wanted to thank Missy and all the folks at Madison and Claudia, whom I just met today. Thanks for all of you for being here. And remember that we need your talent and your joy. We don't just need you burnt out doing everything. So I don't feel like I know this group very well, of course, because I haven't seen faces much, but I just trust that people that want to talk about these things usually have so much to bring, and I want you to be able to bring it with some more joy. So thank you all so much for being here, and I look forward to just kind of catching up on what I missed in the chat here, and you can share this out with some other folks, and please stay in touch. Any last minute questions or comments?
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I posted in the chat, we will be uploading this to our website. So make sure you check that out, and we'll upload all the materials as well. And don't forget to tell Jodi how she did on that evaluation.
Yes, please do. Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead.